Hello and welcome to another episode of Sunday Night Mystery. I'm Brett, and tonight we explore the unexplained death of Courtney Davies. Courtney Davies was a man forged by trauma and violence. He wasn't born with an inherent malevolent nature. Rather, his environment and experiences pushed him down a dark path. From the beginning, his life was marked by chaos and conflict. His father's violent temper and unpredictable nature deeply affected him, causing an emotional foundation of distrust and fear. As a young boy, Davies learned that to survive, you had to be both feared and respected, qualities he carried into adulthood. Courtney's criminal journey was not just about the pursuit of wealth, but about gaining control over his own fate in a world that had seemed to deprive him of it. Power, for him, was the antidote to his childhood insecurities. The fear he instilled in others was, in his mind, a shield, guarding him from ever being vulnerable again. In his twisted logic, being feared was the only way to maintain control and ensure survival in a world that had always been hostile to him. By the time Courtney Davies reached his 50s, he'd become a figure of legend in the underworld, almost mythic in his ruthlessness. Yet, for all his bravado, there was a deep, nagging insecurity that constantly haunted him. He was forever looking over his shoulder, never trusting anyone fully, always feeling the weight of impending betrayal. His reputation may have shielded him from outward harm, but internally, he lived in perpetual fear. Perhaps that's why he surrounded himself with people like Malcolm Martin, individuals who, though flawed and vulnerable, were utterly dependable in their silence. They became extensions of his own paranoia, tools to enforce his dominance, yet this dependence on others' weaknesses was also his undoing. In his bid for control, he neglected to realize that the very vulnerabilities he exploited could turn on him, leading to his own demise. Malcolm Martin's life was defined by silence. Born deaf and mute, he'd always been the observer, never fully part of the world, but always a keen and silent watcher. As a child, he learned to communicate in ways that didn't require words, but in a world that valued speech and hearing, he often found himself isolated, a stranger, even in his own life. When Malcolm met Courtney Davies, their bond was not built on friendship or trust, but on something more insidious: exploitation. Davies, who had learned long ago to trust no one, saw Malcolm's silence as both an asset and a safeguard. Malcolm wouldn't speak, wouldn't tell anyone what he saw. In this, Davies saw a rare opportunity. Someone to carry out his errands and secrets without the fear of betrayal. But this arrangement began to weigh on Malcolm in ways Davies couldn't understand. Every day, he lived in the shadow of a man whose reputation was built on bloodshed and terror. While Malcolm was by no means a saint, he was fundamentally different from the people Davies surrounded himself with. He was deeply lonely, someone who sought connection yet found himself relegated to the margins of society. The line between loyalty and fear blurred for Malcolm. His association with Davies, a man he both feared and depended upon, created a toxic mix of confusion and emotional conflict. Psychologically, the murder of Courtney Davies became the tipping point for Malcolm, a man whose silence was both his strength and his prison. He'd always been controlled by the ebb and flow of others' wills, but when faced with the nightmare of discovering his employer's brutal end, his world collapsed. The act of seeing someone burn in front of him, the symbol of the man who dominated his life for so long, became a profound, shocking trauma. His actions following the discovery were instinctual. Fear drove him away from the scene, his mind clouded with confusion, horror, and uncertainty. But once he fled, the weight of his silence transformed into a haunting burden. In a way, Malcolm had been locked in a mental cage. Unable to speak, unable to clarify his innocence, and forever trapped by his own trauma and the system's failure to understand his plight. The investigation into Courtney Davies' death was, from the start, tainted by a mix of incompetence, tunnel vision, and the complexity of Davies' criminal life. For the Gloucestershire police, the case should have been straightforward. A brutal, gangland-style killing with a clear trail of violence leading back to Davies' enemies. But as investigators dug deeper, they found themselves entangled in a web of lies, half-truths, and dead ends. Detective Chief Inspector Kate Barrett, who led the investigation, felt an immediate sense of unease upon discovering the body. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed Davies whole, its dense trees and underbrush cloaking the horrific scene from view. The sheer brutality of the attack, a frenzied stabbing followed by setting the body alight, spoke of rage, but the deeper question loomed. Why him? Why Courtney Davies? Barrett's gut told her that Davies was no stranger to making enemies, but the scale of the violence was unsettling. Stab wounds, 72 of them, and then fire. The murder spoke of a personal vendetta, a deep-seated anger that could not be assuaged. Was this a vendetta by a rival drug dealer, a retribution from a jilted associate, or was there something more to Davies' past that had come back to haunt him? The forensic evidence was incomplete. The cigarette butt found near the scene provided a crucial link to Malcolm, whose DNA was already on file due to a previous assault charge, but this evidence alone seemed too thin to charge a man with murder. The investigators felt pressure to make a quick arrest. There was an urgency in their pursuits, as if the public spectacle of it all, demanded resolution. But as the investigation continued, disturbing facts came to light. Malcolm had an alibi, a crucial piece of information that contradicted the prosecution's theory. Moreover, there were inconsistencies in witness statements and new evidence suggesting other possible suspects. It became clear that Malcolm was not the only person that might have had a motive to kill Davies. The police had barely scratched the surface of this dangerous world. By the time Malcolm Martin was formally charged with the murder in January 2005, the case had already become a media spectacle. Malcolm, a man whose silence had once kept him safe, now found that the same silence turned against him. His every move was dissected by the press, and he became the face of Davies' murder. A symbol of a darker, more sinister underworld that seemed to claim him as its latest victim. Inside the courtroom, Malcolm's defense attorney, Kathy Williams, was not just fighting for his acquittal, she was fighting against a system that had already branded him guilty. She tore apart the prosecution's case, exposing the lack of direct evidence, the flawed witness statements, and the glaring inconsistencies in police procedure. But the damage was already done. The public had already condemned him. The courtroom became a battleground, not just for justice, but for the very perception of Malcolm Martin. Was he a man caught in the jaws of a system that didn't care for his disability, his silence, his vulnerability, or was he a pawn in a far greater, far darker game? The psychological tension between these two possibilities swelled, creating an unbearable weight in the room. Was the man sitting in the defendant's chair truly guilty, or was he another casualty of a violent world that chewed up and spat out the innocent? As the trial unravelled, the questions that had haunted investigators remained unsolved. Who had killed Courtney Davies? Was it someone close to him, someone who had endured the wrath of his violence and had finally snapped under the pressure, or was it someone far more distant, a figure from the underworld, a faceless enemy who had been watching from the shadows for the right moment to strike? Some speculate that Davies had been marked for death by the very people he had wronged, ruthless figures from the criminal world who'd waited years to exact their revenge. Others believed that the fire was not just to destroy the body, but to send a message to anyone who might think they could rise above the code of violence that governed their lives. And perhaps the greatest, most chilling question of all lingered in the air. Could the real killer still be out there, hiding in plain sight, knowing that the world would never suspect them? The Forest of Dean, where Courtney Davies' life ended, is not just a setting in this grim tale. It's a character in its own right, a silent witness to everything that transpired. The trees that surrounded Davies' burning body seemed to absorb the violence, holding it in their gnarled roots and twisted branches, as if they themselves were complicit in the act. The woods remain silent, dark, haunting, impenetrable. As long as the mystery of Courtney Davies' death remains unsolved, so too will the forest keep its secret. Perhaps in the deepest shadows of the trees, the truth awaits. Perhaps one day it will surface in the most unexpected way. Till then, the fire in the forest will continue to burn in the memories of all who were touched by the brutality of that night. If you have any information about tonight's or any of the cases that we feature, please contact your local authorities. Stay safe, and until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and keep unraveling the mysteries of our world. Because time, like a merciless predator, marches on, leaving behind shattered dreams and broken promises. Yet, amidst those shadows of despair, glimmers of hope remain. Join us next time as we delve into another chilling mystery that continues to confound investigators and haunt communities. Until then, stay vigilant and never forget those who've been lost to the shadows. Until next week, stay safe. Remember, the truth may be hidden, but as long as we keep the investigation alive, it's never truly lost. I'm Brett, and I'll see you next time on Sunday Night Mystery. But for now, stay curious, stay vigilant, and be sure to guard yourself against the darkness that surrounds us all. I'll see you next week on Sunday Night Mystery.